Hello, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Welcome back to the AAS YouTube channel, and we are covering more of the Taking Your Teaching Online tools and tips, and this module is going to be on podcasts.
Yeah, you might think we've chewed all the flavor out of the gum by now, but no, we still have a few tricks left, and there's a few more topics we'd like to cover. Podcast is an interesting one because, as most of us remember, podcasts have been around a long time. I mean, they first were 20, 25 years ago, I think podcasts had their...
So 2020 marked the 16th anniversary of the first time the term podcast was appeared.
Yeah. So they went through sort of a boom, and they never, of course, went away. But I think what's interesting is how they had their second wave, their resurgence, just in the last few years. And obviously, the technology for making podcasts has got cheaper, and people have now got their little handheld devices, and they like to listen to podcasts whether at the gym or out on the move. So podcasts have had a resurgence, and also at the high end of the spectrum of podcasts, the sort of production values and quality of the podcasts, Serial, some of the famous ones that have won awards are quite extraordinary. So they've become sort of a true art form at some level. We're going to talk about their educational uses, their astronomical uses, but once you start to recall that podcasts are big, you probably listen to them anyway, but you might want to remind yourself of what good stuff is out there for your own enjoyment as well as your students.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that a little bit. So podcasts are allow unique occurrences that differentiate them from other media, such as text or video. And they can be consumed in sort of non-traditional learning spaces, taking a ride on the bus, going for a walk. And so they offer some flexibility and mobility that you just can't do with text or video, which sort of demands your immediate eyeball attention. You can be doing other things while you listen to them. And the podcasts have been employed in a wide variety of online astronomy courses. You can use them to do exam reviews. So do a summary of a podcast before that. That can also be used, of course, for lecturing purposes. And there's really, so there's three options. Either, you can make your own podcast, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Personalizing it, perhaps to the student, if the scale of the course is small enough. You can have students. Students love to tell stories. So engage them, their creative sets, by having them make podcasts and turn them in and give some credit for that as it goes along. You can also leverage, as Chris mentioned, there are, quote, professional at varying degrees of astronomy podcasts that can be used in a lecture, either just as a conversation starter for a course or something a little bit deeper, and you can ask them questions about that on discussion boards. But they're a very nice alternative to video.
Right. And in that last category of injecting them into your course, again, that's some of the things we talked about are things you can sort of mix and match and just add as a component of your class without sort of retooling your whole curriculum. So they're good for sort of, modest amounts of credit for a small assignment or whatever. Or they could write a report on them. They could, extract facts or relevant information from them. And, you can do that pretty easily on any subject. The podcasts, the sort of topics, if you like, that work well for that use are stories of recent discoveries in astronomy, which a number do, or descriptions of exotic or particularly hot astronomical objects, or interviews with prominent scientists and astronomers. So those categories all work pretty well.
All right, so if you're going to be doing podcasts and your class is small enough, and this will be a topic we'll talk in another module about scales of courses, things you can do at 10, 20, that you can't do at 100 or 1,000 or something like that. But if your class is small enough, you can make your podcast and you can personalize it to the student, right? Mention their name in the podcast. And that way they'll get a sense that you are actually really there, really communicating with them, and get their engagement going in the class.
Mhm.
So there's really, Chris touched on it, and there's sort of 4 very common genres, if you like, of type of podcast. So one is sort of the chat show. It's kind of what we're doing. We're doing a video chat show here. There's the narrative. You're telling a story, or the tutorial, or you're trying to get a particular point across. It's Kepler's third, for example, or something. And then there's just sort of the quick burst mode, where you blast out a message no more than a minute about, an upcoming assignment that is due, or a hint on a given problem. So those are sort of the 4 common genres that people use podcasts for in their online astronomy courses. I've used them all at various degrees at various times in the past. I've sort of evolved over them and how I use them and what they're used for. So let me give you some examples. And the other ones you can leverage are professionals. So let's play a couple of examples. So given those genres, let me play a couple of examples, and I'll put links below to some of these professional ones that you can leverage. A really nice one at the great for introductory courses is Stardate. You're probably familiar with that, out of McDonald. So they will sound something like this. Deborah Bird is no longer the voice, so we have a new voice if you haven't listened to Stardate in a while.
Stardate, April 10. The sun has been drowsy of late. Last year, it posted the equivalent of 9 months without the dark magnetic storms known as sunspots. That's the 4th highest number in the last 170 years. This year began in similar fashion.
So, quick class, how many sunspots? How many years?
Right.
So those are very easy, digestible. They're great for opening a course because they'll engage them right off the top. And you can ask a question of that before you launch. But those are real smooth. Those are highly produced. Very well done. Then we have another group, which is 365 Days of Astronomy, and they attempt to put out a podcast every day. And they have different speakers, so that there's a rotating crew, and they all sort of have their own personality. So the one I'm going to play is just one personality out of several.
Hi, this is Rob Sparks of NSF's National Optical Infrared Astronomy Research Laboratory. Come here in April of 2020, and in this time of social distancing and physical distancing, I've had a hard time getting people together on Zoom this month to do a quick podcast for us. Therefore, I'm just going to give you a few quick updates about things happening at NSF's National Optical Infrared Astronomy Research Laboratory. First, some news about our name. You might recall last October, I did an interview with Dr. Beth Willman, the Deputy Director of the newly created National Science Foundation's National Optical Astronomy.
So that's an example, sort of a narrative, and he will go on to, it's about a 25-minute broadcast. So the Stardate ones are nice because they're about a minute.
Yeah.
They're very short. You can digest them easily. Some of these other ones you may want to put up as an assignment to listen to, and then give a little report out. But that's 365.
So I mean, and just to add on that, I've done 365 days myself, because they sort of open that up to volunteers. So I've over the years probably done a dozen or so, and and then I've used them in my own class. It's a great resource because that project started for the International Year of Astronomy, which is 2009, 2008, 2009, and so you can do the math. They've got 5,000 roughly sitting there. And they are, so they're variable in length. They're a little bit variable in quality and, gotcha capability, all sorts of topics and so on. The search function is decent. So, you may have to sift through those to find, if you're not just picking one that happens to be very recent. There are some, of course, that are evergreen. They're not about a news story. And so they're just a sort of tutorial topic type thing. And those are good, even if they were done 5 years ago or 7 years ago.
Generally, they'll go into a bit more depth than Stardate will, for example. Stardate stays very on the top, on the surface. So let's go a little deeper. Another one, which is a little bit more of the chat show kind of variety, is Astronomy Cast. And let me play one of those.
That one was almost twice that mass. So what happens when white dwarfs merge? All right, Pamela, before we get into what happens when white dwarfs merge, let's just find out what white dwarfs
Simon
are.
Fraser.
So stars that are fairly average in mass. These are things that are probably under 6 solar masses. There's a lot of
That's a little bit more of a chat show. Simon and Gay go back and forth discussing whatever topic may be. These are about 30 minutes typically in length, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. So they're may not be the greatest ones for opening a class, but they're great for assignment kind of stuff. And they do talk about the latest astronomy discoveries, to get back to a point about Chris and trying to hook him in. So they will definitely address the forefront of astronomy discoveries. And finally, there's one last one I want to show, or listen to, I should say, is NASA. NASA has a huge range of podcasts. I was actually surprised when I got on there and looked. And so they have an entire series on the invisible internet, right? So how does NASA get data down from something like Voyager or one of the other missions down onto Earth so that you can make a picture, you can do an analysis? And so there's this whole invisible internet. And the opening one, this is out of 15 in this series, sounds like this. This is the preview.
We sit on the precipice of a golden age of space exploration.
Very highly produced.
A renaissance of space science and technology. Every day, NASA sends trillions upon trillions of bits of data to Earth, unraveling long-held mysteries about the universe, our solar system, and even our...
channeling Carl here. Yeah.
Right.
Trillions and trillions and...
Yeah. So if you're worried about, when you're going to get 5G or whatever, NASA's worried about interplanetary internet, and they're working on that. They're actually working on the infrastructure for when we have missions and space probes and then people throughout the solar system. How's that all going to work? How's the internet going to work there?
Let's put a cell tower on the moon. How about that?
Yeah.
So those are examples of great content put on that goes beyond video or text that you can leverage in your course.
Mm-hmm. And maybe another category I'll just mention, and it's kind of obvious, and you've probably heard these individually without maybe thinking of them for your class, but they're also nationally. Oh, there's one other to inject. Since, as a Brit, I'll mention that the BBC has a series called Naked Scientists. It's a great franchise of podcasts, and Naked Astronomy is one of the brands of the Naked Scientist franchise. So you can
I'll put that
search on that from BBC. But the other thing I was going to say is that there are nationally syndicated science podcasts that sometimes cover astronomy topics, and of course, when they do, they're really good. And that will include things like Science Friday and Radiolab on NPR. There's one called Quirks and Quarks. There's one that is more astronomy locus called Big Picture Science. It's run out of the SETI Institute with Seth Shostak as the host. And then there's one called 60 Second Science. So obviously nice, short, bite-sized. So, with search, you can find the astronomy subset of these more broadly themed podcasts. And again, the nationally syndicated ones are extremely high quality and well done.
Yeah, the 60-second one sounds like the 1 minute physics videos, which sometimes will cover astronomy topics. So they're another one, although it's not exactly podcast, I get it, but it's another in the very short burst mode, right? Which is one of the genres that you hit. So, I think I've said what I wanted to say for podcasts. Try them. They're great.
I would say try them. They're great. You listen to them yourself. Don't let your students have all the fun. There's a lot of good astronomy.
You have them make them. Sometimes you'll be really surprised with the content that they'll put out. And anytime you get the creative juices going, getting your students actively engaged in a creative process, they will learn it a lot more.
And if you do that, I recommend that too. It's a good idea to, students can be a little slapdash. So it's a good idea to coach them a little in the sense of, recommending that they have at least have a rough script or do it with a friend. so that they can do, test it out and run it off a friend or a buddy before they actually record it and submit it as their work. But again, it'll be spontaneous, it'll be lively, it'll be Gen X, it'll be hitting the generation of people that might want to listen to it in the class, which is great.
Yeah, and they'll probably record them on their mobile devices they walk around with, which is perfectly fine. On the go. Podcast on the go. Cool. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening in on this one, and we'll be doing a few more before we squeeze all the juice out of this gum. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.